OpenAI switching on advertising inside ChatGPT is the moment when the AI industry's internal stress became visible from the outside. The decision arrived quietly, without celebration, without big framing, and without any attempt to dress it up as a breakthrough. It landed because the financial pressure had reached a point where delaying action no longer made sense. Running large-scale AI systems at global usage levels is brutally expensive, and the gap between how much people use these tools and how much money they generate has been widening rather than shrinking. OpenAI burned roughly $9 billion last year, and estimates for this year push that number far higher. At the same time, the company is locked into long-term commitments tied to data centers, power contracts, and compute infrastructure that stretch years into the future. These are not flexible costs. They cannot be paused or renegotiated easily. Hundreds of millions of people use ChatGPT every week, yet only a small fraction of that audience pays. The math behind that reality eventually forces a response, and advertising is one of the few levers that can move revenue quickly at that scale. The reaction inside the AI world said almost as much as the decision itself. Demis Hassabis, who runs Google DeepMind, publicly said the move surprised him. His concern focused on the nature of AI assistants and how closely they sit to personal intent, memory, and conversation. Search advertising operates in a transactional space where users actively ask for information. Assistants operate in a continuous space where people talk, think out loud, and explore ideas. Once monetization touches that layer, the trust relationship changes in ways that are difficult to predict or control. Hassabis also made it clear that Google's Gemini assistant has no immediate plans to introduce advertising. That position is easier to hold when your company already runs one of the most powerful advertising machines ever built. It highlights a growing divide in the AI ecosystem between companies that can afford patience because they have diversified revenue and companies that depend almost entirely on selling access to models, while their costs accelerate faster than their pricing power. While OpenAI wrestles with monetization under pressure, DeepMind is operating from a different angle. Shane Legg, one of DeepMind's co-founders and one of the most serious thinkers around artificial general intelligence, recently announced he is hiring a senior economist to work directly with him. The role focuses on post-AGI economics, including productivity, labor markets, income distribution, and long-term growth. This is not speculative philosophy. It is applied planning. When someone at Legg's level starts building internal capacity to understand economic consequences rather than model architecture, it signals a shift in assumptions. The conversation moves away from whether advanced general systems arrive and toward how societies absorb the shock when they do. Legg has said openly that AGI is on the horizon. Hassabis has put a rough probability on it, estimating a 50% chance by around 2030, depending on how strictly one defines the term. Other leaders across the industry have suggested even earlier timelines. The disagreement sits around speed, not direction. Now, speed is exactly what is colliding with reality. At the World Economic Forum in Davos, AI was discussed less like a software revolution and more like a physical industry running into limits. Executives talked about electricity, grid capacity, cooling, land, and permits. The tone shifted toward constraint. Andy Jassy spoke directly about power shortages and the scale of electricity consumption required by AI workloads. Amazon's response has involved long-term investments in energy generation, including small modular nuclear reactors, because compute growth without power security simply does not scale. Satya Nadella addressed the issue from a social perspective, warning that AI risks losing public permission to operate if it continues consuming scarce energy without delivering clear improvements in healthcare, education, public services, and productivity. That framing matters. AI no longer exists in isolation from society's resource constraints. It competes with hospitals, cities, and infrastructure for electricity. When that happens, public tolerance becomes a factor. Jensen Huang described AI as the largest infrastructure build-out in human history, using the language of factories and industrial capacity. That language shifts expectations. Infrastructure brings oversight. Infrastructure invites regulation. Infrastructure demands accountability. Once AI occupies that category, the rules governing its growth change fundamentally. This collision with physical limits is reshaping competition across the entire stack. Model performance still matters, but it no longer determines success on its own. Access to power, land, permits, and political alignment increasingly defines who can scale. Control over orchestration, identity, permissions, and compliance becomes a strategic advantage rather than an afterthought. Enterprise software companies understand this shift clearly. Workday's leadership has described their systems as the front door to work, positioning existing HR and finance platforms as natural control layers for AI agents. Salesforce has embedded engineers directly inside major customer organizations to learn how AI systems actually behave when exposed to real workflows rather than demos. Snowflake's leadership has openly expressed concern about speed, worried that model providers could move down the stack into data access and displace incumbents. Once AI agents interact with payroll, procurement, customer records, and compliance workflows, governance becomes inseparable from capability. Intelligence alone is insufficient. Permissions, audit trails, and accountability define whether systems are allowed to operate at all. Geopolitics enters this picture naturally. Advanced compute hardware has become a strategic asset. Anthropic CEO criticized recent decisions to allow NVIDIA's H200 chips into China, framing them as a serious national security risk. Regardless of one's stance, the framing itself matters. Compute infrastructure is now treated as strategic capacity. Access can be restricted, supply chains can be politicized, regulatory decisions shape competitive outcomes. In this environment, companies can fall behind in raw model performance and still win by controlling access, compliance, and institutional trust. This dynamic accelerates consolidation. Google's recent moves reflect that reality. The company acquired Common Sense Machines, a startup focused on converting 2D images into 3D worlds, strengthening its ability to model physical environments. It struck a licensing deal with HumAI, bringing in key engineers working on emotional voice recognition while leaving the company operationally independent. It invested heavily in Sakana AI, a Japanese startup founded by researchers who helped invent the transformer architecture itself. Sakana works on self-improving agents and alternatives to current model architectures, exploring paths beyond the dominant transformer approach. The significance lies not only in the technology, but in the people. Researchers who built the foundations of modern AI are now exploring what comes next, and they are doing so inside large ecosystems capable of supporting long-term, expensive research. This consolidation pressure affects smaller players first. Compute costs scale aggressively. Infrastructure expenses do not grow gently. Larger companies survive because they can subsidize AI development with revenue from cloud services, enterprise software, advertising, and government contracts. Smaller companies face harder trade-offs, often leading to acquisition or collapse. Global perspective complicates the picture further. In China, many recent moves by US AI companies appear familiar rather than revolutionary. App-within-app ecosystems, embedded services, and deeply integrated platforms have existed for years. From that vantage point, platform expansions and assistant strategies emerging from Silicon Valley look incremental. That difference in perspective shapes competitive dynamics and expectations in ways that are easy to underestimate. While infrastructure, enterprise control, and geopolitics dominate one side of the story, another shift is unfolding closer to the human body. AI is moving off screens and into persistent presence. Apple is reportedly exploring an AI wearable roughly the size of an AirTag, equipped with microphones, cameras, and speakers. OpenAI has confirmed plans for its own AI device, with strong expectations that Jony Ive is involved in its design. The ambition centers on continuous assistance rather than intermittent interaction. History makes people wary. Google Glass triggered public backlash strong enough to derail the product entirely. Humane's AI pin promised a screenless future and failed dramatically, becoming a cautionary tale. Even novelty AI companion devices have sparked ridicule and vandalism in public spaces. Social tolerance for always-on sensors remains fragile. Despite that, companies continue pushing because contextual perception carries enormous value. Systems that understand what users see and hear in real time can outperform text-based assistants by orders of magnitude. The incentive to pursue that capability outweighs discomfort, even when backlash is likely. Beyond wearables, AI development pushes further inward. OpenAI has invested heavily in Merge Labs, a brain-computer interface startup co-founded by Sam Altman. The company focuses on non-invasive approaches using techniques such as focused ultrasound and molecular tools rather than surgical implants. The ambition extends beyond medical restoration into direct interaction between human cognition and AI systems. Altman has described this vision for years, referring to a future where humans and machines integrate more closely to maintain relevance as AI capabilities grow. Merge Labs positions itself around safety and scalability, aiming to interact with large numbers of neurons without invasive procedures. The technical challenge is immense. Neural signals are noisy, complex, and deeply personal. Interpreting them requires massive real-time inference, low latency, and flexible infrastructure capable of handling biological data streams. That demand pushes development toward unified backends, edge computing, and model aggregation. Each layer adds cost, complexity, and ethical weight. Investor sentiment reflects these pressures. Scale alone no longer impresses. The question has shifted toward whether enterprise monetization, pricing power, and declining inference costs can realistically outpace rising compute intensity. Analysts have described this moment as make or break for companies that rely solely on selling models without diversified revenue streams. Some companies may pursue public listings. Others may be absorbed by larger platforms. Many will fail quietly. These outcomes say little about technical brilliance and much about economic survivability. The conversation around general intelligence continues alongside all of this. Hassabis estimates AGI remains several years away. Others suggest shorter timelines. What matters more than the date is the shared admission that institutions are unprepared. Governments, businesses, and legal frameworks struggle to adapt even to current AI systems. More autonomous agents amplify those gaps rather than smoothing them. Still, history offers context. Human society already operates through collective intelligences larger than any individual. Corporations, markets, and governments coordinate vast knowledge and capability without central understanding. Those systems reshaped economies and cultures without ending humanity. Competition, regulation, and social norms limited concentration of power, albeit imperfectly. AI now enters that same messy integration process. It collides with energy grids, labor markets, regulation, trust, and the human body itself. Clean narratives break under that pressure. Trade-offs become unavoidable. The AI bubble did not collapse because intelligence stalled. It collided with reality because intelligence became expensive, physical, regulated, and socially constrained. From this point forward, outcomes matter more than promises. Trust matters as much as capability, and endurance matters more than speed. That's where the industry stands. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this was useful, like the video and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.